let's talk more about supply and demand. This helps us answer two questions about what happens when there's a change in the market. These two questions are, what direction does the change happen, and how big? The first question is easier in general, the second requires a bit more, but simple ideas nevertheless help us focus on where to look for more detail. On the x-axis, the horizontal axis, we have Q, the quantity of item that's traded. And then on the vertical axis, the y-axis, we have the price. The supply curve is the upward sloping line in sort of yellowish brown. Demand is downward sloping, shown in blue. I've drawn them as straight lines, but they can be curved, and I'll often call them demand curve, the supply curve, to remind us about that. The point where those two curves intersect is the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. If the price were higher, then P star, the quantity supplied, would be greater than the quantity demanded. Now this sometimes happens if some policy sets a price floor that's above the market price. QS, in that case, would be larger than QD. QS is the quantity supplied, QD the quantity demanded. If there's more supplied than demanded, then inventory piles up, unsold. Businesses wouldn't want to put it on sale. Send it to the discount rack. Maybe some policy presents that. So the policy would prevent getting to equilibrium. Governments do this for some farm products. They set a high price for certain goods, and then they have to figure out what to do with the extra. Sometimes they just dump it out. Sometimes they store it. For instance, the government sometimes buys a lot of milk, makes cheese with it, which stores for longer. Sometimes they just pay farmers just not grow more. Obviously, they're winners and losers. The farmers get a higher price for what they're selling. They like that. But consumers have to pay a higher price for what they're eating. They're usually unhappy about that. Now, in the opposite case, there might be price ceilings. Maybe for some reason, prices are required to be lower than the equilibrium value. Therefore, the quantity demanded is going to be greater than the quantity supplied. That lower horizontal line, the price ceiling, hits the blue line for demand to the right of where it hits the yellow line for supply. So there's going to be more demanded than supplied. People are going to want to buy more things, but they can't get it all. Some are going to be disappointed. Concert tickets, for example, often have this sort of characteristic. Now, there are complicated reasons that artists keep concert tickets low, but the outcome is usually more people want to buy than there are seats available. Online resellers step in to make the price move towards equilibrium. Folks who want to see a popular act, they pay a higher price if they weren't fortunate enough to get the initial deal. Sometimes other premium products can have similar issues. Maybe a vineyard will offer a limited edition at a rather low price. Not everybody can get that low price, so bottles are resold at higher prices. But now, let's ask what happens when the supply or demand curves shift. Recall they can shift for lots of different reasons, such as people getting more income or just changing what they want. Suppose this is a market for olive oil, and there was maybe another big study about the health benefits of a Mediterranean diet, so people want more olive oil. That's a shift of the demand curve outwards. So at every price, people want a higher quantity. So the old P star is now too low. Quantity demanded would be greater than quantity supplied, so the price would increase. That increase in price would raise the quantity supplied, so there'd be more olive oil available to meet the increased demand. I'll put it in here, we'll come back to it later, but note the shape of the supply curve is important. In the picture, it's got a middling slope, but it could be steep, almost vertical, or it could be very flat. Those different slopes would have different relative effects on the size of the price change or the quantity change. Now, what happens if the supply curve shifts? Suppose, again, we were talking about olives, but now there's a drought in the Mediterranean where a lot of olives are grown, so harvests are lower. Any given price, there's less olive oil available. That's a shift of the supply curve inward. The old P star value would be too low again. There'd be greater demand than supply, and the price would have to rise. Now, one surprising thing about these sorts of supply shifts is they can be good for many market participants. Consider this graph, where the demand curve is a little bit steeper. Demand is less elastic, less sensitive to price changes. This could be the case where the product is something addictive or habitual. Perhaps coffee is a good example. We'll talk more later. But if one growing area has bad weather, something like a hurricane or drought, now that's obviously bad for the farmers who lose their crops, lose a good deal of their income. But that reduction in supply shifts the supply curve inward, which raises the price. It's actually great news for all the other farmers who are in areas that did not have the bad weather. They get a higher price for their harvest. I mean, maybe they feel bad about getting extra money on somebody else's problem, but, that's how it goes. As climate change increases the probability of extreme weather events, this is one outcome we might see more often. Extreme weather will wipe out a few farmers. It's absolutely terrible for them. But the other farmers see boom times. They might be the unlucky ones next year, but for now, they do well. Now, it's common in popular discussions to hear two different rationales for market. One is that they happen, even if people want a different outcome, such as artists setting low concert ticket prices. Other markets tend to come in. And then there are other high-value crops, such as like marijuana, where decades of government policy couldn't stop markets from working. But the other rationale is that markets are actually good in various ways. I won't say they're good in every way, but markets are highly effective at certain things. I've mentioned in various examples that generally suppliers want a higher price, but consumers want a lower price. There will inevitably be tension. But that can be productive tension. As consumers shop around looking for lower prices, that gives incentives for producers to be more efficient. In an ideal market, the equilibrium price is actually the best choice that would be made by some all-knowing social planner, maybe some benevolent AI that wanted to maximize the wealth of the whole society. A single price reduces the necessary information, however. So much information about relative scarcity of the good and its inputs and how much consumers really want it, it's all bundled into just a single number, the price. Ideal markets are what's called Pareto efficient, meaning the only way to make some group of people better off is to make somebody else worse off. Now, of course, actual real-world markets are not ideal. Now, why are actual real-world markets not ideal? Now, one of the big reasons is initial endowments. Some people start poor, they don't have a lot of wealth. Maybe they're in a place where there are a lot of things working against them. Other people get born lucky. They have a lot of endowments. They're able to demand a lot. Then there are issues with externalities. Maybe one person's choice creates consequences for other people. If I commute in a car, I release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which contributes to global climate change. That's a big externality. Global climate change means that, for example, poor people growing coffee are going to have a tougher time to adapt. Ideal markets also, or real-world markets, have rules for what happens when there are disputes. That's kind of an externality. Actual markets are often not ideal because companies have enormous power, whether through a monopoly where they're the only seller, or maybe there are a few large firms that have power in selling. There's also monopsony, a single buyer, variations of pricing power. Again, if there are just a few buyers, they can get together and change the price. And there are macroeconomic events, such as a recession, where suddenly a lot of people get worried about the future and don't buy as much. Markets are really common. They appear in many circumstances, and they're highly effective at certain things, even when they're not ideal. But linking back to our earlier discussion about how societies often create commodities, they're doing that because better markets bring a wide range of better things.